winter of 1967 came early to the Yukon. The cold arrived not as a whisper, but as a verdict, a judgment that froze rivers, split rock, and silenced even the wolves. Snow piled high over the abandoned mining roads, burying tire tracks that no longer led anywhere. For the men stationed at Fort Nelson, it was another long rotation, another reminder that the Cold War had found its coldest battlefield not in Europe, but in the vast, indifferent wilderness of northern Canada. Sergeant Paul Hensley had been in country for 6 months. He'd learned to tell time by the color of the sky, pale blue for morning, bruised violet for evening. His unit had been sent north under the pretext of communication testing, but even he knew that wasn't the full story. The higher-ups called it Operation Deep Freeze, a joint US-Canadian project to establish early warning radar lines in case the Soviets came over the pole. But rumors said they were here to investigate something else, a series of disappearances along the river valleys, blamed on weather, though no one truly believed that. The men joked about it at first. Every outpost has its ghost stories, and theirs was the Wendigo, a cannibal spirit from Algonquin legend said to haunt those who lingered too long in the cold. They laughed over campfire whiskey, calling it the Northern Bigfoot. But beneath the laughter was something brittle. At night, when the wind moved through the black spruce, it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like breathing. On the morning of February 12th, Corporal Davis failed to report for roll call. His bunk was untouched, his parka gone. The search party followed his boot prints for nearly 2 miles before they simply stopped, as if he had been lifted into the air. The snow around the last prints was untouched, smooth as glass. No struggle, no drag marks, no trail of blood. Just an ending. For the next 3 days, the camp grew silent. Radios crackled with static. Men avoided eye contact. The cook refused to go outside alone, even during daylight. Sergeant Hensley filed a report, but the reply came back hours later. Continue operations. Search suspended due to weather. The message was signed by a major he'd never heard of. Then came the noises. At first, it was just the sound of something brushing against the Quonset huts at night. A heavy, deliberate weight, like antlers scraping corrugated metal. Then came the smell. A sweet, rotting scent that clung to the air whenever the temperature dropped below -40. One soldier swore he saw a figure watching from the tree line, tall, thin, with eyes that reflected like ice. Hensley told him it was a shadow. He knew it wasn't. On the 4th night, the dogs began to howl. They wouldn't stop. The men fired flares into the dark, and for a moment, they saw something move between the trees. It wasn't human. Too tall, too narrow, moving with a sickly grace. The flares hissed out, and the forest swallowed the light. One of the privates dropped his rifle and refused to pick it up again. By the end of that week, Hensley had lost 2 more men, both assigned to the perimeter watch. Their stations were found empty, radios still humming, rifles leaning neatly against the post. Snow had fallen since the night before, yet no tracks led away. The officers blamed disorientation. But in the mess tent, whispers spread. The Wendigo took them. Hensley didn't believe in legends, but he believed in fear. And his men were drowning in it. The forest around them felt alive, the silence too thick, too intentional. When he stepped outside, he swore he could hear something whispering from the dark. Not words, but a sound that carried meaning, hunger. The following night, he found claw marks on the side of the fuel truck. They were deep, ragged, and too far apart to belong to any bear. The metal was peeled like paper. Something powerful had done it. He took a Polaroid and sent it south with a courier plane that never returned. And then, on February 21st, the blizzard came. A wall of white and wind that erased the world beyond 10 feet. Within that storm, they heard it again. The howl that wasn't a howl. A voice that seemed to move between the trees, closer and closer, until it was inside the camp. The blizzard lasted 3 days. 3 days without sun, without sleep, without the certainty that the world still existed beyond the veil of snow. The men rationed their food, burned spare lumber for heat, and spoke only in whispers, as if sound itself might draw something closer. When the storm finally broke, the sky returned in a bruised gray, and the landscape had changed. Fences half buried, equipment lost, and the tree line somehow closer. Hensley ordered a head count. They were missing 3 more men, all from the Northern Patrol. Their tent had collapsed, torn from the inside. The snow around it was churned up, not by wind, but by something that had moved on 4 limbs, dragging deep troughs through the drifts. 1 rifle was found, bent clean in half. No bodies, no blood, just absence. He sent a 6-man recon unit to search the valley below, armed with flares and radios. Among them was Private Callahan, the youngest in the company, barely 20. They moved single file into the tree line, their forms swallowed by the white mist. Radio contact was maintained for the first hour, static-filled, but stable. Then came the silence. At first they thought it was the weather again, but then, faintly through the static, came a voice. Not a distress call, more like whispering, layered over the channel, as though someone were speaking too close to the microphone. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was pleading. Then the line went dead. Hours later, the wind carried something down from the ridge, a flare, red against the gray sky. It flickered once, twice, then disappeared into the storm. The recovery team geared up immediately. They followed the flare's direction until night began to fall. What they found was not the patrol, it was their campsite. But everything was wrong. The snow had melted in a wide circle, the ground blackened as if from immense heat. Sleeping bags lay open, frozen mid-motion, as though the men had risen in panic. Their gear was scattered, rations untouched. The only sign of life was a handprint on one of the tents. Long, narrow fingers burned into the fabric as if seared by frost. They brought back the radios, but not the bodies. Back at base, Hensley ordered all logs sealed and marked unclassified weather event. The men didn't question it. Their faces were drawn, eyes hollow. One of them, Callahan's bunkmate, claimed he heard Callahan's voice over the static that night, calling his name in a whisper. The next morning, the generator failed. When the mechanic went to check the wiring, he found the insulation torn away, not chewed, not cut, ripped by something with claws. The copper inside was slick with frost. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees that day. Hensley kept a journal through it all. His handwriting, once steady, began to waver. He wrote that the forest no longer sounded alive. It sounded like it was waiting. He wrote that he could see movement from the corner of his eye, but never when he turned. He wrote that he was beginning to dream of antlers and teeth. By the 6th day after the blizzard, the northern tree line was dotted with black shapes, silhouettes that seemed to stand just beyond the edge of vision. Through binoculars, they looked like trees. But at dusk, when the wind shifted, the trees moved. That night, the dogs went silent for the first time in weeks. No howls, no growls, just an eerie, perfect stillness. The men realized too late that silence can be worse than noise. By the end of February, what remained of Hensley's unit was a ghost of the original company. They still performed their drills, still wrote their logs, still saluted when the flag went up each morning, but their eyes betrayed them. The kind of exhaustion that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from being hunted by something they couldn't name. The camp smelled of diesel, metal, and fear. Every radio in the outpost picked up the same strange interference, not random static, but a steady pulse. It came every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., like a heartbeat buried in the snow. One of the comms techs, Private Meyer, ran a spectral analysis. The signal wasn't from any known frequency. It carried a faint rhythm, and under it, what sounded disturbingly like breathing. Hensley documented it in his journal, noting that the pulse grew louder each night. He even drew diagrams trying to make sense of it. But he stopped after one of his men caught him tracing the lines into the outline of antlers. That night, he burned the page. The brass didn't respond to his latest transmission. Instead, an encrypted message arrived from Base Echo, a facility none of them had ever heard of. The message simply read, "Maintain observation. Do not engage. Reinforcements inbound." No date, no coordinates, nothing else. Days passed. No aircraft, no convoys, just snow and wind. The men began to whisper that there was no Base Echo, that they were the only ones left. Meyer grew obsessed with the radio pulse. He swore it was trying to say something. One night, Hensley caught him outside, barefoot in the snow, holding the radio to his ear. His lips were moving as if answering something only he could hear. They restrained Meyer after that, locking him inside the storage shed to warm up. He didn't resist. He only smiled, lips cracked from the cold, and said, "It's not outside anymore." By dawn, he was gone. The lock was still in place, unbroken. That morning, the pulse stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. Hensley ordered all radios shut down, all contact ceased. But later that night, the generator flickered, and the radio turned itself on. The same frequency, the same faint breathing, only now it wasn't alone. Beneath it came a second voice, a whisper repeating his name. Hensley smashed the receiver. The noise stopped, but from outside, through the brittle wind, came the unmistakable crackle of static, as if the signal had left the wires and entered the air itself. The next day, 2 soldiers deserted. They left no note, no gear, just a trail that led into the northern pass. The storm that night swallowed their tracks completely. No one ever saw them again. By the end of that week, Hensley wrote his final journal entry. "If anyone reads this, know that the cold can learn your name." That night, the northern lights returned, shimmering green across the sky, brighter than he'd ever seen them. The men gathered outside, speechless. For a brief moment, the terror lifted, replaced by awe. But as the lights moved, they realized the pattern was wrong. It wasn't dancing, it was pulsing. The same rhythm as the signal. The aurora stayed for 2 nights. It painted the camp in ghostly shades of green and white, turning every surface into something alien and unreal. The men tried to act normal, cleaned their weapons, fixed the huts, brewed coffee that froze mid-pour. But no one spoke above a whisper. Hensley could feel the light pressing down, humming in his teeth like static. He didn't sleep. None of them did. The light flickered even with their eyes closed, and in it, he saw shapes. Faces, maybe. Antlers. Definitely. The cold had grown a sound, a low frequency that buzzed at the edge of consciousness. The men described it differently. Some called it humming, others said it was breathing, but all agreed. It was listening back. On the 3rd day, Hensley ordered the generator shut down entirely. The camp plunged into silence so deep it became unbearable. The snow seemed to absorb sound itself. A man dropped his mug, and the shatter made everyone flinch. Fear wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet, surgical, patient. At noon, the aurora vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The sky returned to its colorless gray, and the air smelled clean again. But the men didn't cheer. They felt as though something had gone inside the light and was now missing. Something they would never get back. That evening, Private Lawson approached Hensley with a strange request. He wanted permission to leave an offering. A piece of jerky, hung on a stick outside the perimeter. "Like they do in the stories," he said. "The ones the Cree used to tell about keeping the Wendigo calm." Hensley almost laughed, but he didn't. He simply nodded. By then, disbelief had become a luxury. When Lawson didn't return by morning, no one volunteered to search. They found the jerky still hanging from the stick, frozen solid. A few feet away, the snow was disturbed, pressed flat by something large that had knelt there. The smell of rot lingered in the air, faint but undeniable. Hensley began to wonder if the Wendigo was never a creature, but a sound, a pattern that infected the human mind through cold and isolation. The thought came to him one night while staring at the dead radio. Maybe the signal hadn't been calling them. Maybe it had been changing them. The theory fit too well. The whispers, the pulse, the antlers in the light, all of it tied to the idea of something parasitic, something that spreads not by claws or teeth, but by memory. He wrote it down, then crossed it out, terrified by how natural it felt to believe it. When dawn came, they found footprints around the camp, dozens of them circling the huts pressed deep into the snow. Not boots, bare feet. Human, but elongated, like the toes had stretched and split under frost. They trailed off toward the riverbank and stopped abruptly, as if the owners had stepped off the edge of the world. Hensley stood at the bank for a long time, staring at the frozen river. Beneath the ice, something moved, a shadow gliding against the current, slow and deliberate. When he looked closer, it stopped, as if it knew he was watching, and then it smiled. That night, the cold returned with a vengeance. Temperatures dropped below -60. The aurora came back, pulsing harder than ever, and as the wind tore through the camp, the men began to hear voices carried within it, their own, repeated back to them, word for word, like an echo made of fear. By March 3rd, the camp was barely standing. The wind had torn the roofs from 2 huts, and the radio tower leaned like a broken bone against the horizon. Of the original 24 men, only 8 remained. They spoke little, moved slower, and carried a look that no military training could erase. The look of men who had seen something that should not exist. Hensley wrote less in his journal. His entries had become shorter, fragmented, more like confessions than reports. "The cold is not weather," one line read. "It's a voice wearing the shape of winter." He no longer signed his name at the bottom. Sometimes the handwriting changed entirely. One night, a storm returned, but this time there was no wind. The snow fell straight down, silent and deliberate, as though the sky itself was lowering. The aurora was gone, but the light didn't leave. It now glowed faintly from the snow itself. The men said they could hear whispers rising from beneath their feet, layered voices like radio static buried under the ice. Private Ellison lost his nerve first. He screamed that he heard his mother calling from the river, ran into the white, and vanished before anyone could reach him. The snow where he had run shimmered like glass afterward, untouched by prints. When they fired a flare, the reflection in the ice showed more figures than there were men. Hensley gathered the survivors in the operations tent. The generator was dead, the fuel gone. They huddled around lanterns, faces lit from below like ghosts. "We hold till sunrise," he said quietly, but no one answered. They all knew there hadn't been a sunrise in days. That night, the static returned. Not through the radio this time, but through the air itself. The metal walls trembled with vibration. Hensley could hear it under his skin, in his bones. And then came a voice, deep and hollow, speaking through every frequency at once. "Return." It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely alien either. It sounded like 100 men whispering through frost. The air froze mid-breath. One of the lanterns went out. In that dark silence, Hensley realized something simple and terrible. It didn't want to kill them. It wanted to remember them. He ordered the men to burn the camp, every tent, every document, every trace of their existence. They poured fuel over supplies and set them alight. The flames rose high, orange against the endless white. For a moment, the wind died, as if even the storm was watching. As the fire grew, the snow around the camp began to melt in perfect circles. Beneath it, black water bubbled and hissed, not from heat, but from movement. The men stared as shadows surfaced beneath the ice, their outlines eerily human. Hands pressed upward, palms pale, reaching from below as if begging to be pulled free. When the flames finally died, the sky opened again, not with light but with sound. A low hum filled the valley, harmonic, almost beautiful. The snow reflected it like a mirror. One by one, the surviving soldiers began to walk into the white. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They just walked until they vanished into the sound. Hensley was the last. He returned to the operations tent, lit a single lantern, and recorded his final message. His voice was calm, stripped of emotion. "If this reaches anyone," he said, "don't come north. The cold remembers. The cold learns. And once it speaks your name, it never stops." The tape was found a year later by a Canadian rescue team. The camp was gone, buried under 12 feet of snow. They said the radio tower was still standing, half frozen, emitting a faint pulse. One of the rescuers swore he heard a whisper through the static as they left. It said, "Hensley,